This is BBC One for the South East. Now, Inside Out with Caddy Lee Preston.
In the programme tonight, the claims we're not doing enough to tackle asbestos in our schools.
Not a single school that we visited had an acceptable management plan, and there was in half of the schools we didn't find people that were responsible for the asbestos in the buildings.
I'm Caddy Lee Preston, bringing you surprising stories closer to home from all round Kent and Sussex. Welcome to Inside Out. Hi, tonight we're on the Riverside near Canterbury. I'll be back here later, but first up, it's John Warnett.
This is Rosie Peters. She's 61 years old, a retired school teacher, and less than a year after this interview is filmed, she'll be dead.
I don't want to bear any resentment or anger because I don't think that is productive. It's not good. It eats away at you. So I try not to think that. But I'm sad that people are so unaware of it.
But what kills Rosie Peters? Well, we're going to discover in this film that what causes her death can still be found in 90% of schools in the southeast. It's asbestos, and we'll hear claims that the government still isn't doing enough to tackle this silent killer. In 2009, Inside Out discovered that asbestos was present in nearly all the primary and secondary schools in Kent, Sussex and Medway.
I've taken a dust sample from the bottom of that cupboard, and that's where we've seen the andesite fibres on the microscope.
The concern wasn't from the asbestos itself, that can be found in many buildings. It was how it was being managed. But 2 years later, has enough been done to make sure our schools are safe? Rosie Peters worked at schools across the southeast for 40 years. She had to take early retirement after being diagnosed with mesothelioma, a lung disease that was identified as being caused by asbestos in schools.
My right lung had completely collapsed from fluid, and they still didn't, they weren't indicating really what it was. They started asking me whether I'd been exposed to asbestos, and I was thinking, no, I don't think so, I don't. And the chest surgeon couldn't believe a teacher would have it because I wasn't in any of the industries that, are known for this disease.
Rosie isn't the only victim. Research shows that one teacher per month is dying from asbestos exposure in the UK, and it's stories like theirs that Inside Out highlighted 2 years ago that prompted the Health and Safety Executive to promise to act. So, what did they do? Well, they issued a questionnaire. It went to all local authorities in England and asked if schools knew where asbestos was and how to manage it. But Christine Blower of the National Union of Teachers claims that wasn't good enough.
It's hard to see how you can base your response on a questionnaire when the responses may have been from someone who didn't really understand the situation, where there is the possibility that some of the answers might have been misleading or inaccurate. It's clear to me, it's clear to the National Union of Teachers that a questionnaire was never going to be good enough.
Following the questionnaire results, some schools were identified as having problems, and the Health and Safety Executive paid them a visit. They were then given notices to improve and told how to make changes. But overall, they were satisfied with the results.
The Health and Safety Executive came back and after the survey and said asbestos is being managed well. Are they right?
Well, I don't see how they're in a position to be able to say that on the basis of the responses to the survey and the fact that they simply haven't done enough inspections.
In fact, the National Union of Teachers was so concerned that they worked with a private company that were organising their own school visits. The Asbestos Testing and Consultancy Association, or ATAC, approached 20 random schools in the southeast to inspect their premises. We're seeing the results for the first time today, and they seem worrying.
Another one here, look, the standard of asbestos management in this school is not acceptable. It was clear that asbestos management is not given the priority that it should be. Are schools managing their asbestos properly?
Well, our findings show that they're not.
But the Health and Safety Executive says they are.
Not a single school that we visited had an acceptable management plan, and there was, in half of the schools, we didn't find people that were responsible for the asbestos in the buildings.
And what would that mean over time? And what's the concern? And what do you mean by a management plan?
Obviously, asbestos is a dangerous material. It can be managed in situ, but if you're not managing the contractors that are coming to site, it could get damaged. If it deteriorates over time, it could get damaged, and then you can release fibres, and there's a possibility of exposure.
Another issue is that many of our schools are falling apart.
Well, we've got at least one building with the proverbial flat roof, so you get the inevitable problems with leaks and moss on the roof and all those sorts of things. We've got crumbling brickwork. Everything about the school is on its last legs, really.
Here at the fallen school in Broadstairs, head teacher Pam Ashworth shows us plans for her new school. It was due to be built as part of Labour's Building Schools for the Future scheme.
Yeah, we were just so excited about it. We'd had 2 projects turned down before, and so this one we really thought was going to happen.
But the plans were scrapped under budget cuts, and that means Pam will need to continue to manage the school's asbestos carefully. But as time passes, that may become more difficult.
With the asbestos, although it's managed well at the moment, with this sort of crumbling exterior, it must be a concern that it becomes unstable.
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's okay and it's safe now where it is, but if it starts to deteriorate, or if you want to do anything to change the building, to update it, to refurb it, you disturb it, and that's when it becomes dangerous and becomes a concern.
So we've been told by a teacher herself that the risk of exposure to asbestos in our schools could be increasing because funding for maintenance has been cut. And our investigation has also revealed that only a handful of schools in the southeast were actually visited by the Health and Safety Executive as a result of their questionnaire.
And when private contractors went into schools in the southeast, they found problems in every one.
We wanted some answers. Our first port of call was the previous government. I wanted to find out why Labour hadn't done more when they were in power.
13 years the Labour government were in power, but we still have asbestos in schools. What's going on?
I think fundamentally you have to look at the state of the schools that we inherited in 1997. When you had schools that had water pouring through the roofs, when you had an entire secondary school estate that was in such an appalling condition, the priority of the government was to do the absolute basics that needed doing at that point.
That was then. But what about now?
First up, the local councils.
Kent County Council and Medway Council were both told to improve as a result of the questionnaire. Medway wouldn't appear on camera but said the issues highlighted were due to inadequate training at 2 schools and that any problems had been resolved. But we had more luck with the council leader in Kent, Paul Carter. I asked him if enough had been done since our last programme. After all, it was in a Kent school where we found the asbestos in a classroom.
Well, I think the Health and Safety Executive are pretty happy with our real estate in our Kent schools at this moment in time. I mean, obviously the Building Schools of the Future programme that was cancelled has withdrawn a significant number of large secondary schools that have got asbestos-related issues, but they're being managed appropriately and don't pose a risk to pupils or staff working within those schools.
We've been talking to experts who've been around schools. They visited 20 on spec and didn't find a single one of those schools had a proper management plan in process.
Well, I'd like to test that with our property division. I know we spend a considerable amount of public money every year to specialist firms carrying out those asbestos surveys across our real estate, both our schools and our office buildings.
Next up, the Health and Safety Executive, the organisation responsible for reducing the risk to children and teachers. We showed them a copy of our interview with Rosie Peters.
It's quite poignant to watch that video of Rosie there. I mean, do you not think HSE has to take some responsibility for the deaths of these teachers?
Well, first of all, let me say that every death is a tragedy, and we would like to see none of them. In terms of asbestos and the management of asbestos, the duty is on the owner of the school and those in charge of the premises.
Do you honestly believe that what you've done since our last programme is good enough?
I do believe that what we've been doing has been targeted and proportionate to the risk that there is in schools, and it's not as if this isn't an ongoing programme, and we are continuing to monitor the situation. So we did the survey in 2009-10, we did the follow-up visits, we are now in the middle of another series of follow-up visits.
But the National Union of Teachers disagree. They say more needs to be done.
It is such a serious matter if asbestos is discovered and if a school becomes contaminated that they do have to have a system. And what we're concerned about is that there may be places where there is no system, even for proper management. We need a full audit of every school, primary, secondary, special, pupil referral units. Wherever teachers are working and children are being taught, we need to be clear that asbestos is either managed or there's a process for removing it.
The government is reviewing its plans for building and refurbishing schools. But whatever happens now, it's too late for Rosie Peters. She died last year.
The day before the diagnosis, I was sorting through papers and I found a quotation of John Lennon's, life is what happens to you whilst you're busy making other plans. And I'd been basically making my plans, and this hit me and all my plans just went.